Oh yeah, it's still so
Oh,
oh my god, that's so funny.
oh man. Oh, I am so sorry. We got lied to, bamboozled.
Now I see it.
Oops.
Guys,
Oh man.
folks, you missed a solid 20
Oh,
minutes.
that was
20 minutes of us
just
going,
rough,
of us
rough draft.
talking, thinking we
We
were
were
live.
so bad at this.
Oh, we're such parents. This is so good. Yeah, Luke, you're dead on. We joked about this while we weren't live about being 4 minutes late because of the name of the stream, and now here we are. Here we are. Yeah, Sam, you're right. We're too old, man. It is what it is. Here we are.
We are terrible.
Tim, what's up, man? How are you?
I was like, man, chat's kind of quiet. Like, all right, hey everyone, sorry about that. We were under the impression that after we hit the music, it would just go live automatically, and then we've just been talking for like 20 minutes.
We had a great conversation, guys.
We had a great conversation. So let's do a quick recap. We've been gone for about 3 weeks and 25 minutes because of family issues and just general ineptitude.
Yeah.
I've just been focusing on the Team USA stuff. I don't know if I'm starting yet or not. If I do start, I'll be on Chaos Demons. I think we have another scrim soon versus Northern Ireland, and then versus Poland, and then after that we close the external scrims. We start looking at starter selections, and then we start doing like the secret laboratory stuff.
Yeah.
We're very excited about Belgium.
You're headed to Belgium no matter what, though, right?
I'm heading to Belgium no matter what.
Sick.
Yeah, we're making a family trip out of it and everything. So, Anthony says Netherlands too. We have a scrim against Netherlands.
Ooh,
sweet, cool.
All right now. All right.
Well, I mean, I'm putting my hand up. I'm putting my hand up for all of them. I got a trip next month to visit family in California, but besides that, I don't have anything going on.
That's dope. You said you're trying to avoid some level of burnout right now, right? Getting a little.
Yeah, it feels like I'm training with an injury. I'm trying to make sure I optimize my practice where like I'm getting better and better and better with I'm not losing ground. I'm getting better and better, more comfortable with Chaos Demons, the book, and with the list I'm specifically running. I feel like I have it dialed in pretty tight to what I like, and I'm finding new stuff every single rep. But I'm also I don't want to do useless practice, I guess, and I'm also not being as engaged in like conversations in Discord about the game, because even though I enjoy talking about the game, if I'm just talking about the game and if I'm immersing myself in 40k constantly, like I do risk that burnout. I don't want to burn out like right as we're going to WTC or right as 10th edition is starting. So I am like hyper focused on literally just getting better at my list. That's the only thing I'm focused on right now.
Yeah, and maintaining love for the game. It's just the worst to like lose your love for the game in a competitive environment. That'd be tough.
Yeah, well, I don't want to lose my love for the game like right when 10th edition comes out, so I'm like coasting a little bit. But what about you? What have you been up to?
That's cool. Well, again, to reiterate,
we had such a great conversation. We're just giving you the clip notes of this conversation.
The two big
suck.
Yeah, it was so silly, man. The two big 40K related things that I've been working on over the last few weeks are one, hobbying up my Death Watch list. I've got like a core 1,000 to 1,200 points that I've settled on that I think will also likely carry over well into the new edition. It's like the Spectra Squad, Chaplain on a Bike, a Watchmaster, 3x5 Desolators. They're just good. They're going to be good. And then a Fortis squad with a bunch of Outriders and some plain old Intercessors. And I've just got some Death Watch vets, etc. up. So right now I'm like printing a bunch of custom chapter shoulder pads and like getting ready to do the full hobby commit where I like prep everything and then like crank out the army in like a week. The other end is that I've been helping to organize and I'm playing in this Slow Grow League in my friendly local game store that when we originally putting it together, we thought it was going to be like 20, 25 people, open up our RTT audience. And that turned into 63 signups, like almost half of whom are new to 40K broadly. And we're starting at 500 points. So it's like very easy entry, lots of prizes for hobbies, sportsmanship, general participation, standalone prizes for people that are new and separate categories for them. So we're really hoping to be able to convert like half of those people from the Crusade League into regular RTT attendees and sort of like get them more engaged in the competitive community. So that's been exciting. And for that, I'm playing Chaos Knights, which is dope because I love hobbying up big robots. Aside from that, just like, dad stuff. So much dad stuff.
Yeah, you're playing Chaos Knights, right?
Yeah.
Love
3
it.
war dogs, 500 points, done.
I can't. I think I've played every faction in the game at some point except for Admech and Thousand Suns, and I can't quite put my finger on it. Like, just nothing comes close to the aesthetic that Chaos Knights have. And I'm talking about like as someone who got into the game because of like World Eaters back in like 1996, 1997. They were just 2 data sheets in the Chaos Space Marine book, but I don't know what it is. Chaos Knights, the big evil robots, just everything about them is just, I love it.
Yeah,
they're such a cool
good.
faction.
They're good. So thematic, so dope. Dr. Zero Hour. Oh no, we know. We are aware of the Chaos Knights.
We're very aware. Yes, we know who our warriors too. They definitely done some good breakdowns. Yeah. So let's talk about the we're a little bit late, just we're late to everything. But let's talk about the data slate, man.
So like big sort of like, oh, that's cool, and also like, I wish they had paid attention to this. That's cool, and I appreciate their decisiveness on this, but like just nuking transhuman out of Inner Circle, great. That list was horrible. It was a pox on the meta, running 40 plus Terminators directly forward and scoring all the points and rolling not ones. I'm sure it was super fun for the people that were playing it, but it was like not fun at all to play against. And so I'm glad that that's gone. And hopefully those folks will convert back over to like the more interesting Ravenwing version of Dark Angels, which is like dynamic and speedy and threatening and like, feels like it's like a sweaty, tense play experience, even as the other player on the other side. Versus the like, oh my God, for the love, like please roll a 1. Why are you rezzing that character? Why are you healing that? Oh my God, this is happening again. Experience of playing against Terminators.
I don't think anyone enjoyed that list on your side of the table. Look, I'm sorry for like all you guys who legitimately had like an entire fluffy first wing, first company Terminators. Every single one had like their individual like name on the plate and everything. For like the 0.1% of you out there, like I'm sorry, but it's 2 months, 10th edition. Like you'll get over it. It'll be fine. The other 99% of Dark Angel players, like half of them didn't like it but liked winning. The other half had just gaslit themselves into thinking that they liked that list. So I'm not sad to see that list go at all.
Grant, my chapter's lore is that I like winning. Correct.
It's correct. But yeah, I think you can go full Ravenwing. I think we were kind of discussing this earlier before we failed to hit the live button. There's nothing worse than when you feel kind of like held hostage by like optimization. And I think it's freeing in that sense for Dark Angels players, because I think a single unit or maybe 2 units, but probably just 1 of Deathwing Terminators as like kind of like a unit to kind of threaten the center space of the board is still a viable thing. And then you support it with other aspects of that book. I heard a lot of people saying how they like the Lion. He's cool. He's awesome, blah, blah, blah. But they just didn't think he would make the cut in their current lists. And now I've seen some of those people. Now I've seen some of those people reconsider it because they're like, oh, well, now I could take like the Lion and like the -1 damage banner and a single unit Terminators, maybe an Apothecary, maybe not, And now I have like a solid package to push the center while I have my Desolators, I have my fast guns with the Ravenwing, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a real list, it sounds a little more dynamic. What about Deathwatch, man? I know you're excited about that.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm excited because they got some sort of thematic changes and like a real fix to their secondary. So the thematic change is that they can pick whatever doctrine they want to be in every turn. Cool. That's actually like quite cool, assuming that you're taking the right combination of units inside your list. Because like they can do a pretty smooth like turn one charge with like 20 or so dangerous close combat units and a smash chaplain and like really get it going. And you like throw somebody into White Scars, go with Assault Doctrine turn one. Cool. Like that like feels nice. And it like sort of allows the newly revised Codex Warfare secondary to still serve you because you can like more easily score points as you would like to. God, I'm just gonna like print out templates with that. That's like base banners. We like winning.
I love that.
The change to color order is awesome because like that's like an easy 9 points every game now as a floor.
Yeah, that looks good. I like that.
It's like a really good secondary now. Whereas before it was like a very binary. Like you could get flat 0 very easily.
So something I was just thinking about because we were talking about it before we pressed live. We were talking about how just Iron Hands are relatively untouched. Like the scoring got tapped a little bit, but if you're the best army in the game at damage output, and just the overall package, it kind of makes up for like taking a small hit to scoring because if no one else can really challenge you, it's kind of hard to leverage a scoring advantage over you. I think Deathwatch might. I mean, you let me know. You only got 2 weeks to test this out. I know you're going to be busy with those nights, but I think Deathwatch might be a nice little sleeper counter meta pick because you could run because you have that Warlord trait to ignore cover. So I think you run 1 big unit of Desolators and then 2 small 5-mans, and you put the ignore cover on the big Desolator unit, and then you use Tome of Ectoclades to reroll all wounds against enemy Desolators, and then you can reroll. You can basically get yourself in a position where you're rerolling. You have your big 10-man unit ignoring cover, rerolling hits and wounds, and then you have your 2 5-mans rerolling ones to hit and then rerolling all wounds.
All wounds. And I feel like depending on placement, also ignoring cover because that nowhere to hide is an aura. So really.
Oh, it's an aura. I thought it was command phase selection. Oh, I thought you picked a unit in command phase. Well, that's even better. I mean, I think if anything is going to like level the playing field for versus Iron Hands, I hate that it's like Desolator versus Desolator, but that might be worth looking at.
Yeah. Oh man. Especially given that like everybody else is in Devastator Doctrine turn 1, but the ability to like if you need to later turns, assuming that maybe people start hiding Desolators, given that like it's just going to turn into Desolator versus Desolator counterplay for Marines, having the opportunity to like throw that down later in the game when needed.
I know a few of my peers who I respect, they were half memeing, but they were also kind of half looking at Imperial Fists just to win the Desolator War. Ignore cover, but then save stacking. Because they have, I think, 2 different ways to add +1 to their save. It's list tailoring at the highest level, but I mean, that is, I guess that's the thing you can do. Yeah. What else? The data slate. That Abhor the Witch change is mega trolling. It doesn't do anything.
Mega trolling. Yeah.
Mega trolling.
I do think it's the sort of thing that I think matters. It matters in the like 2 and 3, 3 and 2 brackets, I think, because those were players that actually were taking that alongside stuff like Assassinate, and it was working for them. Whereas I think in like, when you get to like the Shark Tank levels, we've got a bunch of people that are 3-0, 4-0 already and like really gaming, like they weren't doing that anyway. So
yeah, there's a certain level where you kind of have a plan A and plan B based on because you're supposed to reveal your secondaries at the same time. And there's kind of like a plan A, plan B, and then like a flex plan based on like what your opponent picked, and a lot of players don't like to railroad themselves into an aggressive posture if your opponent picks like purely passive secondaries, because now You're the one. You're a bit now. It's like
It's on you.
now it's their game to lose because now all you have to do is just screen you out and apply damage without letting you get good trades out of it.
Yep.
And that Thousand Suns like doing that a lot.
Yeah.
What else? My demon list loves the finial change. That's kind of cool.
It was odd that they they didn't hit the right part of it.
They didn't hit the right part of it. They hit the part that was oddly good into my specific list. So I really only have like 2 RTTs coming up in this edition, and that's it. And so we have a local guard guy that I for sure will like have to go through. So that is super relevant to me. But yeah, it was kind of odd that relic just does so much.
Yeah. Do you think that change is enough alongside the Mortal Wound Bomb nerf? Do you think those 2 changes are enough to like keep people out of the run 30 Kasrkin automatically game? Does that drop down like 10-20?
Kasrkin are still really good.
So cheap.
Yeah, they're cheap. The thing with the Kasrkin unit itself is like an okay unit. It's just a unit that just it's almost like a very reliable like broth to like the best soup you've ever had. By itself, it doesn't do anything, but it's the best recipient of additives or buffs and ingredients that you've ever seen.
Love it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just came up with it off the top of my head. It's best I have. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever seen a unit that just goes from like, you know,
like it's fine. It's
unremarkable to like, oh my god, it is just it takes buffs exponentially. It's incredible. Yeah. So that'll be interesting. I think it kind of railroads you into running the horse guy, and then you might see people experiment with dropping him and only taking like a single 1 or 2 units of Kasrkin, and then using his points to get like more infantry squads or more sentinels. So that might be a thing you see people do. Lean more into the wounds on the table and mission play kind of aspect. But I don't know. I don't really know that much about card. So we'll see. I think anyone who is seriously tryharding for the rest of the edition is probably just going to run Iron Hands, to be honest. And I think the people who are, I think you got people like from our Discord, like Zach and everything, they're still going to do great with guard. And I think a lot of the people that are kind of like struggling to convert 3 and 2s and 4 and 1s to event wins, I think this is going to hurt them. Mm-hmm. But I think people like David Gaylord, who like, you know, who picked up guard, stuff like that, you know, Manny Chima, stuff like that, I think they're just going to run Iron Hands if they're really just trying to like win events. Yeah. I think that's what we'll see happen.
Yeah. Desolators for life.
Yep.
Space Wolves, yeah. My gosh. The amount of free war gear that the Space Wolf list can jam across.
Space Wolves are good. I think the Space Wolves is going to be a hobby thing. I think people who already had Space Wolves or can borrow Space Wolves will for sure run it. I think there's a lot of people that are just going to like look at the idea of adding 40 Compa Meltas 2 months before the new edition comes out, and they're just gonna sit it out.
Nah, no thanks.
Yeah. Whereas Iron, you don't really have to do anything special for Iron Hands. You just have to get that 1 Dreadnought. That's it. Brood Swarm nerf. I think the best way, if you're gonna take down Genestealer Cult in Data Slate, the best thing you do is just post a hyperlink in the Data Slate to Innis's little short clip about how to play into Genestealer Cult. Mm-hmm. I think that would have knocked 5% off their their win rate right away.
We were talking about this in the like data nerd version of Stat Check earlier this week, but we were like trading hot takes, and my actual hot take was like, is GSC in fact really good, or do we just have like a disproportionately high number of savants running that faction, who are all like fantastic players anyway, on top of just like ambushing players in real life, since they don't know what's going on because you don't really interact with that faction on a regular basis.
I'll be honest. Here's my hot take. I think it's a 50% win rate army hidden behind opponents' lack of knowledge.
Interesting.
That's generally how I feel about it. Yeah. And the Brood Swarm nerf doesn't really, I guess it narrows the margin, but it doesn't really change that. But I mean, it's hard to really ever address that without fundamentally changing what GSC are. I think GSC are just always going to be that army that is always going to have a low representation. And it's like the army you take when you want your game to be complicated, but you also want to like stunt on nerds like when you nail it. Same with Harlequins.
Stunt on nerds when you nail it. There's like a hobby appeal too. It does, and I'm sure it feels big.
Yeah, for sure.
Feels good to big brain it on people for sure.
For sure. And I mean, like that's super cool. And I think armies like that. Like I said, I'll take it back to like when I was a big like League of Legends player. There is a champion called Lee Sin, who is like one of the more complicated champs in the game. And a lot of times, I mean, unless he was operating outside of his power band, his win rate sometimes patch to patch, sometimes it'd be up here, S tier, sometimes it'd be D tier, but it never really like consistently he's an old champ, so it never really consistently was way above or way below anyone else, but he was always like a very high skill cap type of champion, and stuff like that. And I mean, if you were in the lower metas and then like someone was like had started up a new account and they hadn't really had their hidden elo updated yet, and then they were in your game, but they had like thousands and thousands of hours on this guy, he was just untouchable. Because he would just juke the socks off you and you could never really touch him, and then he would just zoom in from the bushes and like karate chop you into the sun, and then he would just disappear again. You just could not touch him. So I think armies like Harlequins and GSC, I do think they need to exist. Obviously we need to we have the data to know when they're operating outside the power band, but I think there should be those armies that reward you. It's hard to walk that line of avoiding negative player experience, but also rewarding someone who gets hundreds of games, if not thousands of games with that faction. But I do think that type of army needs to exist, at least in a small amount.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I don't think the meta is going to look very different outside of Dark Angels, Terminator block approaches dropping, and Iron Hands absorbing most of the vacuum left behind by any representation drop in Dark Angels.
I think Dark Angels will still podium a lot. I think what it depends on is just how bad the abandonment is. If people abandon them in droves, then it will drive the win rate down, and then the overrep and stuff like that. But if people don't overreact and they're like, "Oh, Raven Wing is still really good," or mixed lists are still really good, and people don't overreact, I think we'll still see them podium. The thing is that first month after a data slate, that's when all the overreactions happen. And then you see like certain armies, they creep back up again as people realize they're like, oh, we overreacted. This is still really strong. But with 2 months left in the edition, we may not ever see like that rise out of the valley.
Yeah, I think it's just over. Yeah. I am stuttering a little bit. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to try to fix this video.
I'll walk through the final stuff. Jakari got the core keyword back on Kronos and Talos. It's fine with me. I think that's going to be a good, solid, like A-tier type army. I don't think it's going to set the world on fire. I think that nerf has kind of run its course, just where the game is now versus when that was implemented. Talos are cool. I never liked Kronos that much, but Talos are cool. Nids. I'm not a big Nid guy, so I don't really know what a lot of this means, but a lot of these nerfs were walked back, and it's good because I think the Nid nerfs were a public execution, and I think GW overreacted a little bit based on public sentiment with the Nid nerfs. So I'm glad they get to play with some of their toys again, especially the adaptives. That was pretty cool. What else? Tau Broadside's got core. I know some people are excited about that. I don't think it's going to make a big impact because broadsides are slow, and I think they compete with crisis suits for buffs. But they get some ethereal buffs, stuff like that, and it's an expensive kit, and they're cool looking models too. So I'm glad people can bring them again without feeling like they're throwing or something like that. And it looks like that is about it for the FAQ stuff. Cliff, you back?
I'm back. Yeah.
All right. I just walked through the final stuff. Nid's got some of the nerfs walked back, which is good.
That's good.
Tau, I don't think Broadside is going to shake up the meta, but you should be able to play with your toys. And I think Broadsides are cool. So I don't think they're amazing, but I think they're good enough where you could like bring like one or two like MSU and and they'll do some work for you. And then that was it. Anything I missed?
No, that's it. The Knicks, I don't know. I mean, next couple months, the core problem with them is that everything's so expensive now. But it's nice that they like walked back a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, they have the Votan list. The Votan issues were just a lot of their stuff just has way too many rules, and then now because of it, they just have to like point them so much, and it feels like you're playing a skirmish game versus playing a war game. All right, what is next on our agenda?
Got the data slate. We got Death Watch. Oh man.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit. Talk up your Death Watch some more. Where do you think you're going to go with that?
It's tough because here's my thinking. We've talked a little bit about this. There's this core.
Oh, sorry, Grant. Missed that. The Custodies nerve. I'll touch on that real quick.
Oh yeah, that actually.
Yeah, you can't stack this strats on. I think that falls in the same camp kind of as the Deathwing spam thing. It was just not a fun list to play against.
So you could shove 10 wardens up the board and say like, can you kill this with your whole army? Yes, no. Often the answer was no.
Yeah. Or can you if you can you do it while mitigating the interrupt?
Right.
So that was rough. I think we just see like MSU lists, which is fine. I've seen a couple of like MSU second tarn lists. I like the Custodies MSU list. It plays the Warhammer real well. So that's cool.
Dreadless is still good.
Very good.
Things are still good. Yeah.
Cool. Anyhow, sorry about that. Back to your Death Watch.
No, you're right. It's good call. So, man, I don't know. It's difficult. I think you nailed it with the Desolation Squad counterplay. Like it just plays into the buffs that Death Watch can place across such a wide swath of their units. I think the challenge is that there's still no one. I think for sure the stereotypical approach of these 300 plus point giant units for close combat is just like not the move. Like you're not going to win more than a couple of games in the current meta. If you are at equal skill with your opponent, you might win 3 if you're better than your opponents. You're probably not going to win 4 even if you are better in a 5 round event. Which makes me think that like you really got to focus on scoring and like interrupting and just sort of like messing with primary. And Death Watch do have the ability to do that pretty well. So I've got this core. It is a chaplain on a bike, a watchmaster with nowhere to hide, ignore cover aura, Tomb of Ectoclades for pick a data sheet and reroll all wounds against it for everybody, which is awesome. Spectra skill team, and that's where you like combine eliminators and infiltrators into the same unit, and they benefit from each other's rules. So you can get 4 eliminators with a Helix Adept, so you're blanking the first failed save. You get +1 to your cover save, so you're 1 up in cover with eliminators who are shooting damage 3 like las cannons. That's cool. That is cute. And on the other end, you've got this other 3/2 again, 1 up saving cover infiltrator squad that can do random things. Some people flex out 1 eliminator for another infiltrator, or you can throw in some other unit in there for random D3 against charging, D3 mortal wounds against charging units, stuff like that. You can get a little bit cute, but the main thing is that it gives you 2 surprisingly resilient in cover means of screening out large areas of your board from deep strikes in enemy infiltrators, which is really cool. So that got that unit's a given. And then you've got 3 units of Desolators, either 3x5 or 1x10 and 2x5. And then it's I don't know where you go, right? You go do you go Fortis kill team where you slide 5 Outriders and 5 Intercessors in the squad so that you get 5 OBSEC Outriders running up the board 20 inches whenever you want, or do you go like 4 outriders plus a dude with a thunderhammer? So now you've got like infantry keyword outriders who are still very fast but no longer moving 20 inches guaranteed, but there's a hidden thunderhammer in the unit, so that's kind of cool.
I do like that.
Or you ignore that and you go with like traditional Death Watch veterans with like normal bikes, in doing the same sort of tricks but with more attacks and slightly more output.
If you were, I mean, it'll depend on your local meta, obviously. I think if you're trying to take this globally, or to a major, because majors and super majors tend to follow the global meta or what the stats show, which is nice because you can use the information from the meta dashboard and stat check to inform your decision making at the exactly, at the major level. It doesn't quite work as well you can infer stuff for GTs and RTTs, but you can't, like, it's not a 1-for-1. But you can take predictions on what's good or what's going to be good after this balance pass, which to me is Iron Hands, Gene Cult, Demons. I'm sure I'm probably forgetting something. World Eaters, Space Wolves. So you got 3 Marines, Demons, GSC, and that feels like a good spot. So your backfield feels good, and your backfield is also a great firing base. And not only that, I think your scoring got slightly better while Iron Hand's scoring got slightly worse, GSC got slightly. I'm talking about very slight. But like, hey, they got 5% worse, you got 5% better. Maybe that's enough to kind of massage it a little bit in your favor. I think versus Iron Hand specifically, you can win the indirect war. I think against GSC, I think you can chew up, if not delete, anything that's on the board, which is a rough spot to start from as Gene Circle. Space Wolves, you can chew them up pretty good. I think they want to be aggressive into you, and I think this forces them to be more aggressive, but it also really puts the pressure on them to quickly stage and then connect within a battle round or 2, which means they're going to have to take some risks, go for some charges that they don't want to. So that kind of actually puts you in a better spot. I think you just seed the board a little bit, and then you put the pressure on them and force them to take riskier plays. And if those plays don't work out, you can then capitalize on that. Demons run a lot of similar data sheets. So Tome of Ectoclades is extremely scary, in addition to like being able to just pick a unit and just get reroll 1s to win against it. So I think you should actually be in a good spot there just because of the way your army works versus how demon lists are usually constructed. And then World Eaters, you can definitely apply the pressure on them with shooting. So it feels like your backfield and your shooting is taken care of. It feels like your support characters are taken care of. It feels like now what you need is a way to either challenge their space and then also make them respect yours.
Right.
Because you have good deep strike denial, which is great against GSC and demons. And you have great shooting, and you have just enough shooting where you can kind of win the indirect war against Iron Hands, and then slowly attrition, and maybe you can zone out their drop pod too. And if you kill Iron Hands Desolators and zone out the drop pod, and then mitigate the dreadnought, like now you have a game. So I think now what you need to do is, honestly, I would love to see maybe a Judicar go into your list, and then 2 combat units. And what that lets you do is when Space Wolves or World Eaters push into you, now you can tap the Judicar, put a combat unit into
You're
that.
Fight last. Here's the unit.
Fight last. But what that lets you do, it's kind of like Krav Maga, where you're always defending and counterattacking at the same time. That's generally what you want to do. So you want to be able to defend against that melee push into you, while at the same time challenge their space with your melee unit while you're shooting and scoring and zoning out your backfield from these peripheral units. And I think now you have a game. So that's what I would look at. That sounds
right to me. I think so. Then it turns into like there's the ability to throw out a pretty to Grant's point, a pretty thick unit mid board. So you could go with the that like Gravis armored squad. You're like slamming 5 heavy intercessors alongside 5 of the, I forget the name of them now, dudes with 2 power fists and a bunch of bolters.
The aggressors.
Yes. So you have like these 10 toughness 5, 3 wound bodies with the appropriate character support. Let's say you've got an apothecary, you've got the judiciary, maybe you've got a captain that you're taking as another close combat threat, and he's carrying the Dominus Aegis for a 5-up invulnerable save in an aura. It's potentially possible to like use him to extend aura range back to that unit. So it's got a 5-up invuln, it's T5, it's 3 wounds, it's sitting there in mid. It's got a 6-up feel no pain. Or
my two initial concerns on that is that Wolfen and 8-bound wound you on 2s and do flat 3 damage.
Yeah, they will smash
through and you're slow.
Yeah. Yep.
And like I said, Grant says you're paying a little bit of a tax to get like you're trying to get a few data sheets you like, but you're taking a lot of data sheets you don't. I did like the idea of the Outriders you had.
Yeah,
that's a cool idea. I like that.
Innes talked a bit about this though. So here's the thing about the Outriders. And I'm not sure which one of these is the appropriate answer. I think it just might be a taste thing. So that's a very cheap unit, and it throws out a lot of strength for AP1, potentially AP2 if you want it to be attacks. T5, 4 wounds each, moves real fast, like great. Bases are huge, all that good stuff. And you can make the move as infantry, so like a lot of that wraparound stuff, having to move around terrain and obstacles goes away. Awesome.
That's a huge deal.
It's a huge deal. On the other end, you're stuck with these like groups of 5 intercessors or 4 intercessors and 1 outrider back. You're like, what do I do with this thing? Like, go score points, and then it just dies. That. Like, it's like a lot of points to spend on a unit without a very clear role. His recommended approach, and he threw like a list out in the Discord, was like just treat veteran squads the way that you're treating the outrider plus intercessors. But use the Deathwatch veterans as like pseudo devastators. So then you go like 5 Deathwatch vets, 4 of them have frag cannons, or maybe if you pick the heavy bolter plus heavy flamer combo weapon and use Tomb of Exoclades to completely blow something up on a drop pod turn. You take 3 of those units, which gives you like 3x5 or 2 of those units and 2x5 mini devastator squads, and then you just slam bikes into them. They're normal bikes, but you can like give them all power weapons, and they do the same thing. They're bikes with OBSEC that you can put an infantry model in, so they gain the infantry keyword. But they're not as durable, and don't have the same volume of attacks, but they're higher quality. Now, and they're a little bit more expensive on a per unit basis.
That sounds good to me. Yeah. You just need to keep them safe, and you just need to make sure they don't get charged or indirected, which right. I think most opponents are not going to try to indirect that unit. I think they would try to indirect your Desolators, or they try to indirect like your scoring. Because like I said, I think the situation, you're going to run into the situation, especially for Space Wolves and World Eaters, or any other kind of like melee army, is where you've done a lot of damage for shooting, but you're going to have that one turn where you need to get an entire battle round worth of damage, which means shooting and melee and any peripheral damage, like the whatever that, like strats, mortals during the charge phase, psychic, whatever have you, any of that kind of peripheral stuff. You're going to need to dig deep and pull everything. And usually, like I've seen it a bunch of times, that usually involves shooting with all the buffs, all the strats, and they have something that's up in your face and in your grill. You need to deal with it, but you don't want to take resources away from that's going down range, because if you spend all your resources to deal with whatever's on your front doorstep, that lets everything else in your opponent's army stage up on you for free. And then at that point, you're just constantly on your back foot, and you never really get your hand on the steering wheel of the game ever again. And that's why I said I like to fight last, because you can shoot on their side of the table, pick up their scoring units, pick up the stuff they're trying to stage. You can missile off one of your combat units, and then you fight last their unit, and then you put another combat unit into it, and then they're just getting shot, and they can't really interrupt because you fight with the far field unit first.
Yep.
Then you fight with the other unit, and then at that point, either they have nothing to swing with, or nothing's worth interrupting with. And at that point, generally, that should put you in a pretty good spot in the game.
I'm into it. I have a plan. I have a plan for this final 1,000 to 800 points now.
Yeah, it's just going to be kind of like what do those units look like, and where do you spend the points? I'm excited to see what you come up with.
It's awesome.
Cool. What next?
Awesome. Well, really, what's next, Tim, is your article that you produced on the website.
Yes,
which is like a great primer for folks to be able to, like, play a game, come away with it, get some lessons learned. We'd love to hear about it.
I saw a lot of people asking questions in our X1 question locker about this, so we can definitely kind of like roll into it a little bit. Let me find the link for it. Boom! There we go. Yeah, this was it was inspired by Innes's article, and this is back when we were in BiffPod, like years ago, and I just had this idea that kind of came to me, and I was like, man, Innes is probably one of the best people in the world at explaining 40K, but he's also very good at tailoring his explanations like where you are as a student, as a player, whatever. So I knew he was the right person to ask. I said, hey, I have this idea. And again, because I used to be super competitive into League of Legends, I don't recommend anyone plays that game. It's super toxic, but it's kind of cool to see. I'm noticing a lot of parallels behind where the 40K community was 5 years ago, and like the steps it's taking, it's growing. League of Legends went through like the same kind of thing, and now commentary and punditry about the game League of Legends is very like high level, and everything's very codified. There's a lot of concepts and terms that are like, man, I took a couple looks into articles, everything to see where it's at, and it's crazy, like the level of detail and the nuance they've gotten into it. So I think we might see that in 40K in a few years as it gets very sophisticated. But tangent, I remember seeing an article where basically said, hey, based on this guy was like a challenger level, and he was like, hey, he posted a Reddit thread. He said, hey, tell me what league you're in. There's like 7 something different leagues or like something like that, or like levels. And then each of those are stratified into 5 different levels. So you have like Diamond 1, or you'll have like Bronze 3 or something like that. He's like, post where you're at, and I'll post you what mechanics, strategy, and tactics you probably need to be working on to get to the next level. And it was a very popular thread. I wish I could find it, but this was like 8 years ago. That's cool. And so I posted it. I basically told Innes, because I knew Innes was familiar with the game. And I said, hey, this is the idea I have. This guy did this. Do you think that's a thing you can do for 40K? I think you're probably the best person who would like understand like the assignment, the concept. And he's like, yeah, at that time he was more focused on teams than singles play. But he thought about it pretty much. He's thought about it all night. He slept on it. And then a day or two later, he came out with that article. And then this, 3 years later, he redid the article for Stat Check. So, he inspired me. He inspired me to write an article, and I am trying as much as I can to not get hyper into specifics of 9th edition mechanics or like edition mechanics, because I want something that's going to be the evergreen going into 10th edition. So I have at least 5 or 6 more articles planned over the next 2 months.
What are like the sort of 2 big takeaways from your article, which viewers you can find at stat-check.com in articles?
Yep. And I also linked it. I kind of hinted at the topic for the next article, which is basically going to be all about challenging your opponent's space. You're taking your movement plus your shooting range, or your movement plus your charge range, and you don't try to actually get your opponent's army in your threat range. You try to get objectives in your threat range. And the idea that we've talked about a lot in 40K, a lot of people talk about, is they talk about trading. And when most people hear about trading, they think of, I trade this unit for this unit, or I trade this character for this character. Everything, as soon as your models like look at each other, everything's a trade. Take CP take command phase buffs, take spells, take any kind of other resources like Warp Storm or whatever, marker lights, all that kind of stuff. Even individual wounds off characters or multi-wheel models. If you give away or use any of that to do anything, that's a trade.
Mm-hmm.
If I lose a wound, if I lose a single wound off, like if I step over a Haywire Mine and I take a single mortal wound on a character to move 10 inches up the board, that's a trade. And that's a concept that I think people may not come around to for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But that is generally the thing. You need to, when your opponent gets low on resources, you need to be moving. You should be moving close to your opponent almost always. But when your opponent's getting low on resources, you need to be a little more aggressive with your posture, moving to a little more, because they are starting to trade down and they're losing the abilities to punish you for moving close to them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, generally, I hinted at this episode or two ago, but the way people play mentally, I generally don't like to play. I mean, there's situations where you should say, okay, well, your unit's threat range is 26 inches. I'm 26.1. I'm physically unchargeable.
Yeah.
I like to, and I think this is a good thing to get in the habit to, play a couple inches inside their threat range. And that way you tax them mentally of trying to decide of if they should go for it now that it's physically possible. And then also they have to now start thinking about the risk reward of going for a 10-inch charge or a 9-inch charge and potentially failing. But the article itself, just real simple. Have a training plan, knowing about intent versus execution. So that'd be like strategy versus tactics. Taking notes on what you're doing, setting achievable goals, and most importantly, focus on one concept at a time, and then just keep practicing it till it's muscle memory, and then try to move on to the next thing.
I love it.
So real generic stuff.
That board presence thing is such a. So I remember when I was trying to figure out what to bring to LVO. I was like, soft throwing by Brandon Castell in the first place, but it was like, all right, what other big knight should I bring? Because I want to bring at least two. Like in the chat, and Types is like, oh, bring an errant, don't bring a paladin, because an errant will let you advance and charge with armigers. I was just like, oh, right, because there is this 1 CP strat to auto advance 9 inches or 8 inches with an armiger chassis, which means that I've got like a 22 plus insert charge range, threat range, and that's like at every table I was at, letting at the outset, letting people know like, hey, this is the baseline threat range for any one of these models. Was like, oh, like on their end, that's now something. Those are like risk calculations they now have to make for the rest of the game, and that like gets taxing over time. And just seeing a model go like flying across the board and then charging onto an objective and then like consolidating onto it, like it was a whole thing. So one, shout out to Typhus because he's really smart. And that was like great advice to a noob like me. And two, it really just reinforced what you said about the like how important spacing and board presence can be.
Yep. Great. I haven't quite figured out my next article, but it's generally going to be something about that. It's going to be more. I'm going to be talking more about challenging your opponent's space and then playing kind of at the edges of the threat range versus playing 0.1 inches outside of the threat range. It's going to be more like dancing just within the threat range. And then also retaliation trading. As commonly as it started, the term there was never really a term for it like 2 years ago, but now the term we're starting to hear is clapback. We hear that often. That's a real concept. But that's a retaliation trade, because that usually comes when you start a trade and then they clap back. That's retaliation trade. And then that's usually when the game begins like in earnest. So that's probably what the next article will be. And that's something I don't see going away in 10th edition.
Yeah. Yep. If anything, it's probably going to get a little more. It's so far, which is like really great, I think, on Games Workshop's part. They really do seem to be moving purposefully away from like intricate mechanical knowledge being the be all end all, more towards like, here's just the rule. It's very straightforward. Here's the how, here's the when, here's the why, here's the what. And then given that information, which is now more easily accessible to everybody, It's on you, the player, to figure out like what do you want to do with your models, how do you want to risk them, how are you going to move them in space. So I think that all that to say is that I think that what you're reinforcing here is like going to be very easily translatable and probably even more important in 10th than it has been at 9th.
Yeah, there'll be certain things that like I think that's the big goal of mine is like there's a lot of things I want when people read these articles to be like, oh yeah, I've experienced that, or I've seen that, or I felt that like kind of like in my gut, but I didn't realize there was a term for it. I didn't realize, like they'll have those games where like something felt right and they couldn't quite grasp it, or something felt off, they couldn't quite grasp it, and they'll go back and they're like, oh, that's what it is. So yeah, but yeah, the big thing is just if you make the right play, if you make the right play but you execute poorly, that's something you can work on. But if you're constantly making incorrect plays and you're just getting bailed out by luck or by dice or something like that, that's going to catch up to you in the long run and especially over several games. And it's going to lead to really unreliable results, especially at events.
Oh my God. I have a sports analogy that's very timely related to this. So go. All right. So if anyone watches basketball, the playoffs are on. The Lakers game was on last night. Lakers are playing the Grizzlies. Anthony Davis is a very physically and athletically talented player. I've also never really watched him play a full game. Like I just like don't usually watch a regular season, and he's been in LA. I don't really catch it anyway. It's clear to me that no one taught him how to operate in the pick and roll. Right? Like he doesn't know how to set it. He doesn't know how to set a screen. He doesn't know how to roll off of it. He doesn't know how to like hedge his defender to make it easier for the person with the ball to choose one of three options. Like he sucks. And as a result, he like was basically gumming up the lane and like blocking the person he was setting ball screens for the entire game, and had a terrible game as a result. Like any reasonable big man who's like been trained in the last 10 years should know how to do that really well. My guess is that he's like so physically talented that he never got that sort of sit down basic practice. And nobody reinforced it to him because he didn't need to learn it. And now they're in the playoffs in the first round, playing a hungry Grizzlies team, and missing the basics likely cost them the game. Like he had a terrible game. All because, he could not execute on a very straightforward foundational skill for people in his position in the pros. So and when that's my one sports analogy for the night. I will stop there.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I would say like kind of anyone who's not really like into basketball, I would say like that's kind of if you've ever set up a go turn and you meticulously plan out a go turn and you're charging with like 4 or 5 different units, and then you accidentally move block one of your units with the charge.
Whoops.
And you can't even declare a charge or something like that. That's basically, if you don't know how to set a pick and you're going up lanes, it's basically the same thing, but in basketball. But yeah, when your physicality goes down with age in pro sports, if you don't have good fundamentals, that'll show. And I think to bring it back to 40K, I would say like if you're playing a multi-round, like 5, 6, 9 round event, and you don't have the fundamentals, when your dice start to fail you or when your fatigue starts to creep in, I think you'll be exposed.
Yep. So
you gotta winning a big event, there's always a little bit of luck involved. But if you don't have good fundamentals, like you're just kind of your performance is going to be very volatile. Not just from game to game, but I'm talking about like from turn to turn, phase to phase. That was good. What else we got? Oh, brief little blurb. General mental state purchasing guidelines for Lame Duck Edition. We were just kind of spitballing stuff to talk about, but I know a lot of people were talking about like, oh, I'm not buying anything, or I'm going to do this or do that. I think a good thing is to like know like what your goals are, hobby wise, game wise, whatever. Don't. Trying to get my with this. If you have a big major or super major coming up, I guess in the next 2 months, nothing we say is going to stop you anyhow. You probably aren't listening to us for advice anyways, but if you're trying to go for a golden ticket and money's no object or whatever, like sure, beg, borrow, steal an Iron Hands army or something like that, or 30 Death Slayers or whatever you got to do. But I would avoid, like I said, if you want to spend a bunch of money and meta hop or adjust or roll with this this last balance pass, like by all means, we're all consenting adults. Go do what you want to do. But a lot of people are going like lockdown mode. They're like, oh, I'm not buying anything till 10th edition, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, guess what? When we finally get all the rules and Art of War puts out like their first hot takes article, or Manny Chima shows up to a GT 36 hours after 10th edition launches, like that man is the canary in the coal mine for what's broken. Yeah. So guess what? Someone in a high level of the community is going to figure out what's good within 48 hours of it coming, and then everyone's going to try to hop on that. And guess what?
It's going to sell out immediately.
Unless you're in like the DMs of like one of those people, on the regular, by the time you figure out it's good, you already can't get it.
It's too late.
So there's a lot of people offloading armies right now. Myself included. I've been offloading Marines because I'm just trying to like free up hobby space. I'm being like realistic. I'm like, look, I don't have time to hobby this. I don't have time to get reps with this, stuff like that. There are good deals out there. Probably not in Desolators because as people have been figuring out, the price has been going up. But there's a lot of good deals on a lot of armies out there. There's also a lot of people that are going to be overreacting based on the last data slate.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to flesh out an army, or if you're trying to hedge your bets on like, hey, I have no guarantee that this is going to be good 6 months in the 10th edition, but it might. I'm not buying 3 of the units. I'm just buying 1 or 2. Not a big deal if it's not good. Sure, it'll be good sometime in the next 3 years, whatever. There's a lot of good deals out there to be had right now. If you like search like the used mini market or stuff like that. So if you see a good deal, or you see like a Star Collecting that's hard to come by, or a Combat Patrol that's hard to come by, or stuff like that, or your local game store is running a special, don't let the new edition scare you into passing up what's obviously a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can always sell the minis if you really feel you made a mistake. That's fine. The used market is always very strong. So that's all. That was the spiel I wanted to put out there.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. You want to roll into questions? You got anything to add on to that?
No, I mean, like there's like basic stuff like fast shooting is probably going to still be good. Transports appear to be much improved. Like if you've been really itching to hobby up a Land Raider, not a terrible idea to try to pick one up on the cheap now. They're super fun. But like who knows how they'll be costed, blah, blah, blah. But assault ramp is a cool rule. Slamming Terminators out of assault ramp and then charging after it moved is really nice.
GW Instagram showed a picture of Primaris Marines coming out of a drop pod.
That's very cool.
So if I don't know anything really about 10th edition rules, so I'm just no disclaimer. I don't have insider knowledge here. But if Firstborn and Primaris transports and passengers like now do this, you functionally have double as many transports as you do now. So I mean, there's play there. They definitely. We still don't have a flying jump pack combat unit for Primaris, but we almost have every other battlefield role covered for Primaris Marines. Yeah. So
yeah, it's coming.
But those new Terminators look so cool.
They do. They look. Yeah, they're great. Yeah. My non-40K associated hobby purchases are going to be locked into Lizardmen in the new Seraphon releases, so that's going to be my like new toys over the next couple months.
Hell yeah.
It's going to be good.
Let's roll into questions.
Questions.
When was 3 weeks ago? So I think that was in March.
Carry the one.
Basically anything after March 30th, I think. This is great. Oh, man, so many questions. If I miss anyone, I am so sorry. I apologize. We'll try to get to everyone. We try to push through all the other stuff pretty fast today, so we have more time for questions. Also, if you have any questions and you're live in the stream, please post it, and then we will get to it. I think I almost found it. Cool. So starting with McWork, watched the last episode today. Really liked the match review section. Had a question. What do you do when the trends for the matchup contradict your own experience? That's a good one. I will say it will. My answer to that question will likely depend on the size of the event I'm going to. If I'm playing a GT like in my own my own home meta or an RTT, then I will probably cleave to my own experience, because my own experience probably if I'm having bad matchups, if I'm finding I'm struggling into armies I should be having good matchups into, or vice versa, chances are it's probably in practice versus my teammates or my local regulars or stuff like that, which means that now it's now more like it's a familiarity and skill is kind of like narrowing the gap, versus factions. So it means that those are probably the matchups I need to be practicing for. Or, it's kind of like if you go to a GT and you're like, okay, well, I know this person is in attendance. You need to know how your faction plays into their faction, obviously, but knowing how you as a player play into that and how them as a player play and then your two relative skill levels is probably more valuable there. I would say in a major, I would probably go to the stats unless I knew that the stats don't match up because of my own experience, because of something the stats don't show.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, demons, when you go to the meta dashboard, it doesn't show big boy time, it doesn't show pure Zinch, it doesn't show pure Slanesh, it just shows demons. And it says their matchups are good into this, okay into this, bad into this. But it doesn't show which archetypes those are. So that's where you need to then defer to your own experience. Be like, okay, well, I am running pure Zinch or I'm running pure Slanesh, and I know it's good into this list because X, or bad into this list because Y. So that's probably where I would deviate, if that makes sense. What about you, Cliff? What do you think?
Nah, I got nothing. I mean, it was just like broadly, even something that's like 60-40 according to stats, like 40% chance to win a game is like pretty good. It's not the worst. I know in the macro, we look at
any given Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. Like we look at something like 60%, we say like, man, that is really high. And in the aggregate, it is. It's obviously indicative of some sort of macro trend imbalance. But like within the confines of a specific game, having a 40% chance to win in an unfavored matchup is still like pretty high favorability. Like it's pretty good.
From Nate Hintz, listening to the Death Watch, this space episode, you mentioned watching how your opponent responds to your models, i.e., seeing how they respond to your aggression or defensiveness, etc. Can you flesh that out further? What impact does the response have on your gameplay? If they meet in the middle, what does that change compared to they pull back instead, etc.? So we touched on this a little bit. They said a lot of it is the concept of challenging your opponent's space, and then that's generally the way. I'm trying to think of how to explain this. If the best way to explain it, I guess, would be to show how I gauge it. So I basically start, if I know nothing else about the player, if I am familiar with the matchup and I'm expecting them to pick certain secondaries, I first look to see if they deviate from those secondaries. And then that can mean two things. That could either mean that they just don't know the matchup and they've misread it, or it could mean that they're risk averse, or it could be that they're whatever the opposite of risk averse is, like they're risky. I don't know. Maybe Cliff is better with words than I am, so maybe he would know. But you can tell a little bit about how risk averse a person is if they know the matchup and they cleave on secondaries in a way you don't expect. Versus like if you're playing Thousand Suns and they took like Assassinate, Engage All Fronts, and Abhor, you're kind of like, okay, this guy is not risk averse at all, that means that he's more likely to go for like long charges because he just doesn't care about falling flat in his face. He's going to just send it, constantly without any regards to like to him, failure is like not even a thing that happens. Then when you start the game, you watch how they deploy, how aggressive they are. And then the third and the most telling one is when you let your opponent know your threat range, or they're measuring your threat range, and then you move forward and you start challenging their space. Do they move up to meet you, or do they pre-measure and do they pull back? When you have lots of indirect, do they realize that they're on a clock, that they're on an hourglass, and they start playing more aggressively into you, or do they just kind of like score what they can and slowly die? That's kind of like, maybe over time with the articles, I can maybe expand on more concepts, but that's generally what I'm talking about, is when you do certain things or when the certain decisions are available, are they risky or are they risk averse?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that on the table a lot too, especially when you start challenging their space and pushing up into them.
You can often see the act, like not just the actions on the table, but like what the player is like doing and saying as you're doing it. Like I play almost exclusively like big model lists or like scary limited number of threat lists. So a lot of my approach to the game is like, here are some problems that you need to solve now. And like, if you don't solve them, then I win. Like, how are you going to handle this? And there's a lot of like, like shove an armature super far across the table. Like, shit. Like, literally the other player, like, fuck, what do I do about this? Or like jam a big like block of Tyranid monsters across the table. Like, okay, good luck. Like, can you figure out, 6 Carnifexes or not? Like a lot of armies can, but like a player who is not necessarily experienced might be like, I actually don't know how I'm going to deal with that before next turn, and they crash into me. And so it's like it's not just a measure of like whether or not they're experienced with their list, but also like how experienced they are with just like being in a sort of uncomfortable situation and playing through it.
I guess follow up right here. I'll just show real quick. Great explanation. Can you expand on how that realization about your opponent then affects your gameplay into them? So if my opponent is risk averse, I'm going to start using that. Like when I talked about like kind of dancing inside someone's threat range. So I don't want to bury the lead in my next article, but my rule my rule that I call it the rule of fives. And that is, if my opponent can advance and charge, whatever, I assume that anytime they roll a die for movement, they're going to roll a 5. So if my opponent moves 6 inches and can advance and charge, their threat range is 24. So what I will, instead of being 24.1 away, I will be 21 inches, 0.1 away, because that assumes they're going to roll a 5 to advance and they're going to stick a 10-inch charge. But the likelihood of them rolling 2 5s and a 6 is infinitesimal. The likelihood of them rolling 2 6s or 3 6s, very small. But it dances right in that area where a risk-averse person is not going to go for it. So I can basically, every single time I trade board positioning with them, I can kind of cheat them of 3 inches or 2 inches or an inch. And I can try to start snowballing that into, I can start accumulating those little inches that I'm cheating off you here and there into like a real lead, either in material on the board or on the scoreboard. You'll hear people say, like one of the scariest things you'll see it like a Lenin, Nadavadi, a lot of them, they've mentioned this on podcasts. One of the scariest things for a high level player is a competent or upper mid level player who just knows when they just need to try to high roll you. They're competent, they're not going to make big mistakes, but they're going to try to use the dice to like narrow the gap of skill. And so if a person is doing that, either because they recognize that or because they just don't understand risk at all, like now you can't really leverage that in them because they're just so aggressive. And it's either like they're either just aggressive by design or they're aggressive on accident. But you are now in a position where you have to respect them high rolling. They don't have to respect the risk of failure.
Yeah,
because they're just being aggressive. They're just being aggressive, And unfortunately, because now you're eaten from the fruit of forbidden knowledge of respecting threat ranges. Now the fact that you are thinking critically about threat ranges is now being used against you. So that's a thing. So if someone is aggressive, now I have to respect threat ranges more. I can't give them those 10-inch charges because they'll go for it with like 4 or 5 units, and like it'll be just my luck that they'll stick it with 4 or 5 units, and then the game will end. Whereas if they're risk averse, now I can start dangling units out, dangle out those 9 and 10 charges, and try to, they either just shrink back from that or they take the risk. And because they know it's a risk, they, instead of spending CP over here, maybe they bank some CP for like rerolls or something, or like reroll the charges, or, instead of casting or using like some sort of spell or chaplain litany to increase the unit's output or whatever, they use it to reduce the risk of that risk they're taking. So there's like little small things you can do based off if you can gauge early on in the game how risk averse your opponent is, because that's half of the game. Half the game is movement. The other half is your risk threshold and your risk management.
It was great.
If that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, I don't know. I'll try to talk about more of the article, but that's like how I feel about it. Next question.
Did you cover how many armies to keep up to date with? That was interesting.
So if you are willing to meta hop, I would say I would amend the answer I gave was 9. I know it sounds crazy, but you'd have to hear my reasoning. I probably would amend that to 6, and I basically put in 3 categories. The first category is the number of armies you actually are like actively practicing and staying current on. Then the second set would be like your armies in the back burner. And then the last one would be armies that are like suit your play style or that you're interested in and that you're familiar with the rules. And you aren't current with, but if someone gave you like a month or 2 of notice, you would be willing and able to get those armies up to speed, get a meta list, brush up on your rules, and then get a bunch of reps with. And you wouldn't be at like 90 percentile or 95th percentile, but you get up to like 80%, enough to like win an RTT or go like 3-2-4-1 at a GT. If one of those armies, if you're somewhat familiar, and one of those armies is just like an insane army, like Iron Hands or Dark Angels, like that's enough for you to win like a GT or go 4-1 or something like that. So you just let the army carry you a little bit, and then learn just enough about the army where you don't get in the army's way while it's winning for you.
Yeah.
So I put that number around 6. 2 that you're active, 2 on the back burner, 2 that you could pivot to if you had enough notice.
I think if you're looking at it, there's like a pure meta, regardless of meta, what is likely to be okay. And from that perspective, it is in your best interest to own Marines that you have painted in a custom color that you can pivot into whatever Marine chapter you think is most appropriate at the time. And then to Johnny Watkins' point from YouTube chat, like Craft World Eldar have been good. They have been competitively viable since like day one and remain so throughout just about every edition of this game. So it is in your best interest, again, if you want another competitively viable option, to like start collecting Craft World Eldar. And the models are cool.
You have to like the play style though, because I followed that advice, and then I played like 3 games of Craft World when they were at like before they were nerfed or anything, and I was like, this army is not for me.
Yeah.
And I sold it and I gave away from it. So that's the thing. Like, and that army was also, I'm talking about this edition before it was even nerfed or anything. It was not an autopilot army at all. That was a hard army to play. Yeah. Any army where you have some CSM used to be like this. It's not so much anymore. But any army where you have to, your position of one psyker depends on the position of another psyker, and then combat and shooting units depend off both of those. That's not an army you can walk. I don't care how overpowered they are. That's not an army you can just like walk into.
No, it takes time.
And it's a very specific play style too, and they could have the most busted rules of all time. If you're not into that play style, you're not going to enjoy that army. You're not going to stick with it. You're not going to get reps with it. So I've heard the advice thrown out for Craft World. I fall on the opposite end of that. borrow it before you buy it, because I bought into it when I thought I was going to take it to an event. I thought I was going to like whip up everyone. I played like 5 practice games. I was like, nope. Not for me.
Yeah,
That's
I think overarching all of it is like, if you don't like the play style of a given faction, regardless of how good it is, like, don't do it. Like, I would never play 45 Deathwing Terminators. Like, that seems so deeply boring to me that I could not bring myself to do it. But
that's a good segue into Pizza Bagel's follow-up question. How do you approach a game plan hedge risk when playing more variable risky armies? Think about armies like Grey Knights or K-Suns, where win pack or rely heavily on second spells. Honestly, me personally, I just don't play those armies. We talk a lot about like, Unga Bunga, and then like Anthony talks a lot about like just kill them and stuff like that. I don't like those armies that like sit in like 25% or 49% of the battlefield and then like do a whole bunch of combo stuff and then like score by 2 points at the end of the game.
How many points of failure?
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot of points of failure, and you can dilute the game plan of those armies by adding a lot of mitigating factors. But usually those armies, at least when they're designed correctly, will have some sort of point or stat budget where every single tech piece that you take to hedge the inherent riskiness dilutes what those armies do somewhere down the road, either through raw output or mobility or options or something like that. And so if you go full reliable, you end up with like a shadow of what those armies should be. Sometimes you can find like the optimal way to do it, but it's a lot of mental bandwidth, and it's a lot of mental bandwidth. It's a lot of points of failure, and I have generally found that those armies are not resilient to an opponent being disruptive and aggressive unless you massively outskill that opponent. So that's kind of my take on it. I know a lot of people love Grey Knights and they love Thousand Suns. It's just not for me. Also, with Psychic Phase going away in 10th edition, like, who knows? This might be completely different. I really hope. I know a lot of Grey Knights, Thousand Suns players are worried about 10th edition. I've heard from Justin Curtis, who's a big Chaos player, that he's very excited about Thousand Suns, and that's probably the faction he's going to start out with in 10th edition. And he says they've really nailed the theme. And instead of like an aspiring sorcerer and Magnus casting the same spells, it's going to be like different abilities and spells based on how powerful you are as a psyker. And there's going to be a lot of permutations, and he seems very excited about the theme. So a little off topic, but if those armies, it's not really my play style, but I would say I generally just don't. I try to avoid those high risk threshold armies in the first place, because then you spend so much time trying to mitigate them, and they're very vulnerable to disruption. Maybe in 10th edition that will change, and they'll have armies that give you the psychic feel without like that feels bad when all your points of failure collapse on you, because you're going to have that one turn where just everything goes wrong.
Yep.
So that's generally how I do it. Is I just don't play those armies.
Sorry.
I very much like. I try to keep my armies to 0 to 1 casters. This Slanesh Rust list is the most casters I've ever played, and it's 2. And I just have a Foot Herald who sits way in the back with Delightful Agonies, the Field of Pain spell. And then I have a Chariot it's a Hellflare with Slothful Claws, 3 damage, and she has Hysterical Frenzy. And the idea is that she is pure aggressive. Her spell makes other people kill harder, and then she's a unit that can kill people on her own, and then she hands out auras and command phase buffs to help other stuff kill people. So she makes my army hit harder, and if I ever need to trade that away, I can, and I still have Delightful Agonies / Smite Battery / Deny like safe in the back. So that's generally how I divided that. And I try not to think about the second phase more than that, because it scares me and I don't like to read. You
got faction knowledge. You've covered that previously for factions you don't necessarily play against.
Yep. What else?
We've got the travel rewards bonus episode is coming.
I'm slowly turning the screws on Cliff, and sooner or later we're gonna.
Yeah. As soon as I grab for free time, it's gonna be a little while, but it's gonna be a good one. And
God, there is so much shit posting in the question.
very
Oh my
lovable
God,
shit posting, but a lot of it.
there is a lot. Oh my God. Okay, here we go. How do you increase your faction knowledge for factions you don't play and struggle to get reps against?
Yep.
I would say, first of all, take a trip to Wikipedia and do that.
Read, baby.
Also, anytime, assuming they're up to date, they've kind of fallen behind, but Goonhammer used to really do these really good like wave top articles on factions, faction playstyles, or if there was a big data slate balance or GT pack, whatever, they would like do like faction spotlights. Those were good. I also think generally, and I'll plug our own Discord, go into our Discord and go into like the channel for a faction you're looking to learn about and just kind of lurk in there for like a week or two or a month. And over time, you're going to hear the same data sheets, you're going to hear the same spells, you're going to hear the same stratagems and the same like sub factions. You're going to hear all that over and over and over again. If you do that, if you go into BCP and you look at the whatever's putting up podiums and wins, 4-1 records, 5-0 records, whatever, and you're basically just trying to look for common trends. And then once you can identify those common trends, you go to Wikipedia and you look for the synergies of those common trends. And once you have the idea of like most lists, the first 1,800 points are always the same, and then the final 100, 200 points is like flex. So once you have an idea of what the core 1,800 point core of like a winning list is, and what people are buzzing about or hyped on or whatever, and you could see why they feel that way, and you can see the synergy, you're well on your way. At that point, I don't like watching streams because it's just hard for me to sit there for 3 hours and watch other people move models around. But click through a stream or two with that knowledge in your head and kind of like watch it on the table a little bit. And I think at that point, you're miles ahead of where you started.
One of the things that I do, this is a shout out to Adam C over at Outer War Down Under. He does a really good job with sort of codex level rundowns. Like there's the typical like man reads codex YouTube preview, and Outer War Down Under really takes that alongside a faction specialist, and they dive through like the codex, what is it, what matters inside it, and then in part 2, which you should totally sign up for, they get into like actual dives investigating some of the initial impressions about what synergies there are and what combos are available and sort of like what that particular faction operates well against, or what it's susceptible to. So that's like a good, if you're like an audio learning person, it's a really good first step to just like throw on, get a little bit of learning, and then like commit to the learning path that Tim just described. That'll put you in a pretty good spot, even if you're not playing the faction yourself or running into it. And I am choppy again.
It's all right. No, I can hear you fine. Your video's a little choppy. So from Grant H, how do you self-identify as a player, and how does that affect your approach to games, winning, losing? Essentially, the convo from April 12th and Hot Takedown. Hot Takedown has had like 6,000 messages between now and 4/12, so I'm not going to look back on it. But he says, related, how do you define competitive? What definition of competitive look like in the context of 40K? So it's a very open-ended question because there's not like a chart I can pull up and be like, oh, well, I land here on this chart. If I told people that there's a chart for competitive, that chart is going to look different for everyone. And then also, even if like my chart has 5 words on it and Cliff's chart has 5 words, our individual definitions for those words may be different. I would say the best way to look at it is whatever it is you're working towards, what does success in that look for in your mind? And then I guess like also because if you can define that, now you know what makes you content, what makes you happy. And then also I would say, just for a mental health perspective, are you enjoying the path to get closer to that end goal. I would say you need to know those two things. Know what your end goal is, but then also, are you enjoying the journey? And if you're not, like, what needs to change? That's very much a non-answer, but I don't really know what my end game for success looks like personally. I would guess I hope that like when I pass away that like I don't get like 6,000 points of Warhammer models just thrown to the trash by my next of kin. I don't. I do enjoy. I feel like thinking about the game and playing the game like kind of keeps me sharp, I guess, in some ways. I enjoy seeking out challenges and then rising to those challenges and then beating them, and then maybe even revisiting them, and then moving on to the next challenge. And I've also really enjoyed. I've really enjoyed people that I used to locally that I used to bounce off of. Now I can hang with them. Some of them I've surpassed, but even then we play enough against each other and then we're all trying to build each other up that I never really stay out in front of them for too long. And it's very much like a steel sharpens steel situation. But that's me. It could be a lot of things for a lot of different people.
Yeah, that's good. I think if you're going to an event and you are trying to win, and your goal is to win that event, then you're like, it's probably safe to describe you as a competitive player, and that's totally okay. I would describe myself as I don't know which way to order these words, either casual competitive or competitive casual, in that I'm trying to do as well as I can with the list that I have brought, knowing that like during list construction, a decent part of my approach to building out the list and even what faction I choose is rooted in like, which of these models makes me happy when I'm putting them on the table, when I'm hobbying them, like that sort of thing. That said, my like overall goal with most games, like not just 40K, but like sports, video games, etc., is to not lose and instead get beat, right? So like I absolutely despise losing a game because I like messed up. Like that's the worst. But I have no problem getting beat by someone who is more skilled than me at the game, assuming that I tried, like I was like, I did my best, and that person just like outplayed me. Like I've like I live for that. Like that feels good because it usually presents a learning opportunity for me. And if I can really look at what I did and see that I did as well as I possibly could, then I feel good coming out of that. And if along the way that wins some RTTs, great. And like, you know, hopefully down the line as time allows and I get better, hopefully more event wins or more wins in larger events come along with that.
Yeah, it's always a little sweeter for both sides when the victory, when the person had to work for it a little bit, versus when, you know, either there's a wild skill or faction power disparity, or it's like some crazy dice happen or whatever, turn one of the game. And I know a lot of high level players say don't blame the dice, but they say that because blaming the dice, it's a good mindset to have. But once you get to a certain point, dicing does happen. I've seen it happen. I've seen the high level players who go on the podcast say don't complain about dice. I've seen them get dice and complain about it behind closed doors. But they've also learned that 99% of people complain about dice when it wasn't dice. They just made mistakes. But there is that 0.1% of the time where like it legitimately was dice. You know, like you've been playing a neck and neck game, and you know the game is close, and then it's the final push, and your custodian opponent goes like 34 out of 35 on 4-ups.
Oh God, the 4-up save.
Yeah, it's a total thing. And then like, but you just have those situations where like it was just such a blowout, like at a certain point of the game that the rest of the game becomes performative, and you don't want to be a bad sport, you know. But versus like when you have those really close games and there's like a round and a half left, and you both sit there and you look at the scoreboard and you try to work out like, okay, well, these are the assets left on the board. This is what I have to ignore. This is what I got to do to try to like get those last couple points. And if I hit this charge, and I kill 3 out of 5 dudes, I'll win by 1 point because like thin the ranks and engage in all fronts or something like that. Example, it doesn't matter. And then you both do it, and you're kind of like, will he, won't he? You know, and you make the charge. You're like, oh, you know, like those games always feel better when it kind of comes to that. From Raphael Harbinson, I apologize if I mispronounced that. Less a question, more an observation. I fall in the bucket of people that basically only plays at events, with maybe a practice game for a couple months. The way I have found to have relative success is to not try to play the metagame, but use my free time to think of ways to counter it, and focus on armies that play roughly in that way. Over time experience with it builds up. By this, I mean I'm not going to out Iron Hands Innis. Even if I get 6 practice games in before an event, we can both rock up with the best list. He will know how to use it better than me. So instead, I have focused on not playing the game that dominates the top tables. Q White Scar's pure combat list as an example. I will be at a pure list disadvantage, sure, but I also don't play the same game, so I have a puncher's chance in the most top meta lists. Just a different approach to gain the most limited practice time. Sure, I still lose a game in most events, but I get to be snowflaking while doing it, which is own reward. That is what I call a counter meta list, and I love it. And I think it's one of the most rewarding ways to play any kind of competitive. It's Street Fighter, League of Legends, Warhammer, whatever. Any of these kind of things where you have like factions or players or characters, stuff like that. You have meta, counter meta, and off meta. Off meta are just people that are just doing their own thing. Regardless, they're oblivious or they just don't care to like what the meta is. Meta is obvious; it's what's popular, whether it's popular because it's strong or popular because it's popular or whatever. And then counter meta is very small thing of that, but that is people who are looking to exploit the gaps left by the meta. Back when Sisters came onto the scene, they were very strong because power armor was everywhere and everything. Everyone was like playing these big, chunky, more expensive units, whatever, and everyone was bringing lots of anti-tank or lots of high AP, high strength, high damage weaponry. And then you just had a million of these one wound models that were T3, and they didn't care about your strength of your gun because you're winning them on 2s anyhow. They didn't care about your AP because they just had an invuln. And they didn't care about your damage because they were 1 wound. And they were able to out-trade because everyone was bringing the wrong guns. Mm-hmm. And when Dark Eldar came out and Dark Eldar changed the face of 9th edition, everyone started. Granted, Dark Eldar were operating outside their power band. However, people were bringing guns to demech lots of vehicles simultaneously and then kill the T3 idiots that spilled out. Well, guess what? That was bad for Sisters. And so their days as a counter meta faction ended just like that because Dark Eldar were now meta and had the same profile as Sisters. So that's a specific example, but back when Keeper Rush was good, there's a lot of stuff out there. Raphael, I love it, and I think that's a great way to approach the game. I think that's a rewarding way to approach the game, and most importantly, it's a way to get reps with a single faction and really try to eke out those little optimizations to learn your good matchups, learn your bad matchups. More importantly, to learn why they're good and why they're bad. And then also you will have a slight advantage a lot of times, especially like in the mid, maybe not the top tables, but like in the mid and like upper mid tables, because people don't know what your list does or they don't have experience into it. And so that's a slight advantage you have there. I think it's a good thing. Like I said, Cliff with the Death Watch or anyone with the Death Watch, I think there's a reasonable GSC are leveraging it now. GSC, everyone's talking about GSC, and they leverage it constantly because the meta representation is so low that they're like the most counter meta army I've ever seen. Because if you have a 100-person event, there'll be like 2 people with GSC there, and one of them will be good and one of them will be not so good. So no one's really, people just don't know how to play into that stuff. That's a great way to approach the game, in my opinion. It's a very rewarding way to approach it. What do you think? What do you think, Cliff?
I mean, yeah, that's it. I love it. Way to be honest in your own self-reflection. Way to be like take advantage of your time and focus on the stuff that matters most to you and get good at the thing that you care about. It's a great approach.
Cool. And then some some more like casual questions. Grant, what's on the hobby printing table? Brother, I've just been trying to finish slap chopping this Slanesh army so that way I can actually paint something I want to paint. I don't know if we're playing 9th or 10th at WTC. I don't know if I'm starting or not starting, but I'm just trying to get – I think I'm in the final iteration of this list. So I've just been working on it. I have a chariot. I have 1 chariot left to paint. I have 1 demonette squad left to paint, and then I got to base the whole army, and then I'm done.
Yeah.
It's been a chore.
Love it. I've got Chaos Knights, Death Watch, obviously, and then when Seraphon release, I've got a bunch of Seraphon big dino models ready to roll, plus whatever is in that box. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Though there is a Red Butcher's Terminator list that is calling my name because the models look great. And it would be really fun to Unga Bunga my way around some RTTs with it, even in early 10th. We'll see.
I mean, I think as long as you can figure out delivery, like I think it'd be fine.
Yeah. Land Raiders, baby.
Yeah, I think you do that. I mean, a lot of times delivery is just putting so much pressure in your opponent's pressuring your opponent so hard and challenging their space so much that they can't punish how slow your second or third wave is.
Slow unit. Yeah, that's a great point.
So that's a way to do it. I mean, it's a little bit terrain dependent, but that's definitely a way to approach it. Tim, what's your favorite cut of protein to smoke? That depends. If I have if I'm entertaining and I need it done by a certain time, then I'll do like a tri-tip or picanha, and then I'll usually do something easy like pork or fish, especially for like people who are not, dietary concerns and stuff like that. And that's pretty decent. If I'm doing it for myself or my family and time is not of the essence, and or I'm just trying to flex on people, it's hard to beat a brisket because
I love the trying to flex on people.
I'm telling you, like people who are not like big into smoking or stuff like that, like so even if brisket is kind of like almost like a rite of passage, like if you're smoking, because it takes a long time and there's a couple little like pitfalls you can fall into, and I think and it's an expensive cut of meat. I don't recommend smoking more than like a 13 or 14 pound. After that, it gets too big. It starts heating unevenly. It's more trouble than it's worth. But like something in the 12 to 14 pound range is like the perfect size. But there's a lot of pitfalls, like preparation, it drying out, the dreaded stall, which is like at 160 degrees, the temperature stops rising. And at that point, you either just push through it or you wrap it to try to get up to 200 degrees, then it's done. But I've never had anyone not be impressed when it's been sitting and resting and I take it out and you cut it right down the middle and you flip it or you turn it out so you can see the cut and you squeeze it and all the like juices kind of run. A little money shot. Never had anyone not be impressed by that, especially people who are not, like the kind of like the pit master or smoking and grilling crowd, like it's just a crowd pleaser every single time. And it's so good. It's so bad for you, man. I looked up the nutrition value of brisket one time. And I was like, I can't unsee that. But yeah, that's probably it. So like a smaller, like I said, picanha or tri-tip. If I have a timeline I'm trying to hit, but if I got some money to burn and I'm trying to crowd please, definitely brisket.
Yeah, Tim, give me let me back in 1 second. I got to reload because I'm driving myself crazy with the staccato.
Okay. While you do that, I'm going to go through the comments. That Sam is I'm trying to think if Sam was talking to us or he's trying to talk to someone in the thing. Definitely agreed though. Should click deep rather wide. Like just on the fly. Yeah, I definitely agree, Sam. Part 2 is definitely the best. Cliff, you back?
I'm back.
All right. Just catch you up on Sam's comments. Yeah, I definitely agree on all those, Sam. Okay, we're almost done with the questions. Game hobby pet peeve. Cliff, I've been talking entirely too much, so I'm gonna let you lead on this. Give me your game hobby pet peeve.
No, man, you've got like good rundowns. I don't know whether I've got. All right, here's a silly pet peeve on the hobby end. Your bases, borders must be painted. They must. Preferably black. Brown is okay. Not green. unless you're memeing and doing some sort of old school. Like you got to fully commit though. You need the flock. It's got to be flat, no rocks. Like then you go goblin green or whatever the equivalent is.
They're early '90s Ultramarine / Millennial. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's the way. If you're gonna do that, do it.
How about this? Textured basing on the rim.
No, no. Like I cannot. It physically distresses me. Do not do that shit. Jesus Christ. God.
I like it when they do it, but it's like it's not even. It's like it's just pure chaotic evil. Like it's just the texture is just like it's like glooped over the side, like melting ice.
I just got goosebumps. Like it makes me so unhappy. Yeah, don't do that. That's a huge hobby pet peeve for me. I don't mind like. Go ahead.
Oh, it's funny because when they do that, it softens that edge of the top of the base and the side of the base, and it almost looks like the bottom of like a flying base, but like cursed.
Yeah. It's just bad. It's so bad. Don't do that, guys. Please. Yeah.
There is.
Yeah.
There's
who cares? Like whatever, that's fine, but don't do that to your bases.
There is. I'll have to link it sometime. I'll link it in the Discord. It's hilarious. I gotta find it. I don't even know if I follow. I think I may have unfollowed it because it was too cursed. But there's this Instagram. It just reminds me. There's this Instagram page of this guy, and he's just. I don't know where he finds these. I think he finds them on like eBay or used lots, or whatever. Or he just like people send him pictures. But it's just. It's all like kit bashes and conversions, but they're all cursed. Like it'll be like a kit bash, but it'll have like base, but the base will be like old dog hair or something like that. It's just like the worst. It's just the most cursed things you could ever like. The actual food. It's just like terrible. Lots of bad basing jobs.
It's like the diametrical opposite of like ASMR videos. Just like makes you want to turn it off as quickly as possible.
Yeah. God, I can't. I want to make some sort of like tirade against like what you see is what you get or whatever. So I guess I don't really. I'm real permissive, honestly. Especially if it's not an event, like if it's an expensive hobby. If you want to proxy a model like before you commit to buying like an $80 or $100 kit, because you're just considering it like for an upcoming event, and you're like, the model's okay. I kind of want to like run this, but I don't want to like the hobby's expensive, man. If you don't like the unit or you're not going to use the unit, like I'm not going to pressure you into buying it for a practice game. That's ridiculous. What you see is what you get. It's one of those things that, like, I think most people, like when they're kind of new to the hobby, they're worried about. You'll see people post about in Discord or Reddit or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, people be okay if I do this. People be okay if I do this." Blah blah blah. Like as long as it doesn't cause confusion.
Yeah, it's fine. Nobody cares.
And I mean, if you're running your Ultramarines Hellblasters and you're like, oh yeah, they have the Plasma Eradicator 2000, but they're actually modeled with the Plasma Demolisher 5000. Like, are you okay with this? I'm like, bro, they look like plasma guns. I can't tell the difference. They're the only one of that unit in your army. Like,
no problem. We're good.
Yeah, there's not going to be any, they shot a slightly different flavor of plasma than I was expecting. Like, it's not going to change anything. Yeah, what you see is what you get, in my opinion, is a scam run by Big Plastic to keep you spending money that you don't have to be spending. So then,
oh man,
if it really worries you, I guess like magnetized. But like, man, there's like kids trying to get into the hobby. Like,
yeah, it's just like
they're like, I'm not gonna tell like a high school kid to like to go buy magnets, go buy like clippers, go buy a vice drill, go buy all this other kind of stuff so you can magnetize it. Like, come on, man. Like, just tell me what he has, and then like if like budget, the hobby is getting more and more expensive. The prices keep going up. So if you even have to like run a thing where you have 2 units and they look similar but they have different loadouts, you're gonna put some sort of thing to differentiate the squads anyhow, like paint the bases or put like a little rubber band on it or like use squad marks, whatever, and just be like, hey, the red squad has the strength 8 guns, the blue squad has the strength 5 guns.
Oh,
cool.
Yeah.
Before I make any kind of meaningful decision in movement or whatever, I will probably ask you and clarify, and then I'm gonna start making the actual decisions where it matters. And as long as like they don't suddenly change places like mid phase, like we'll have bigger issues. Like it's fine.
Yeah.
So I would, that would be the thing. I think there's just like, I think people accidentally try to give advice about what you see is what you get, and they just misrepresent the general like zeitgeist of like the community on it.
Yeah.
And I
People
think
are very chill about that stuff. As long as it's
people are super chill.
We're playing with toys. It's all good.
Okay. We're almost done. Favorite protein shake to smoke? That is a total meme question. Do you guys take notes to your games? So what type of things do you jot down? I don't. So I know I gave this advice. I did that a lot when I was starting. I don't do it as much anymore. Now, if I do something, if I make a decision, whether it pays off or not, if I felt it was a wrong decision, I will mentally and verbally pause in a practice game. I won't say this in an event game, but I might pause, but I won't say it out loud. But in a practice game, I will pause and I'll be like, oof, shouldn't have done that, or that was a mistake. Even if it pays off, I'll be like, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. You know, like, oh, I charged one too many units, or I spent CP here, that was overkill, blah, blah, blah. That's less CP I'll have later, something like that. Just taking that mental pause can kind of help me remember.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also gives your opponent like a good chance to also like offer you constructive criticism right there on the spot. When I was more taking notes, I found where I got the most impact or the most bang for my buck initially was like anything in the early game. So after we deployed, if my opponent went first, and then he did his movement, his shooting phase, and then his charge phase, that's where you're going to get like the most like instant regret right there. Is like, ooh, I shouldn't have had that unit there. Ooh, I should have had that unit next to this aura of like Apothecary or Field of Pain, or oh, I should have screened out this area there. That is a great time to like take a picture and then like write a note right then and there while it's fresh in your memory. Because then after that, the game just kind of breaks down. And a lot of the stuff in the mid and the end game is going to be very, very dependent on the context of that specific game. It might not transfer to other games. And it's kind of like a shout out again. The reason why I always recommend people to do, especially if you're starting out, to do re-rack sessions. Not every game makes it to mid game or end game. You definitely need to practice those. But if you're a newer player or if you're an aspiring player, every game has a deployment phase. Every game has an early game. So that's where you get the most bang for your buck. Not every game has a mid or end game. Some games just end too soon. But yeah, I would definitely take notes after your opponent moves something up or drops a drop pod or exploits a hole in your screen or whatever, turn 1, turn 2, and just obliterates like 25% of your army. That is a great time to scribble down some notes. Go like,
ooh, what happened there?
Ooh, shouldn't have done that, you know, or if you managed to like set yourself up, or if you accidentally, or if you like you tried something new. If you tried something new in deployment, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to like dangle this unit out here a little bit further than I'm comfortable with, and then see if see how it plays out. If I go first, I can leverage it. I can leverage the aggressive position a little better. If I go second, I might lose it, but I'm okay with that. Or that might not even be something that's on my opponent's radar, and I just don't get punished. You play a couple games with it, and you're like, I kind of like that. I think I'm going to start doing that from now on.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff like that. Do you think being able to 3D print has contributed to your hobby burden backlog, infinite possibilities you can print random bullshit like I do? I used to commission 3D print, and I've kind of burnt out on that a little bit, and the market's gotten a little bit saturated. So now I've definitely downsized like my setup. And also, I think the answer to this question definitely depends on how many printing failures you've had. If you've had a lot of failures and or leaks and or cracked screens, it can definitely be a burden backlog or whatever. Also, I mess with Mesh Mixer a lot, and if I'm trying to especially if I'm trying to do stuff for other people and they have a request, something like that, the process of getting the Mesh Mixer and then supporting, that's going to be a solid hour or two of mesh mixing, exporting to STLs, orienting, filling up a build plate, supporting all the stuff that you're doing on your computer. Like, it takes a lot of time actually. So it's pretty big time sink. At this time, you could be spending playing games, doing real hobbying, like anything. So it's definitely, you only have so much hobby bandwidth, and it can definitely be like a thing. But if you're just trying to do like small, simple stuff, if you don't go deep, you won't get deep.
Yeah. It's definitely added to, I feel like it's been a net addition to my hobby work. It's definitely a little bit more time, but at the same time, it's time that I don't spend like, so as an example, like I have a couple of Grey Knight Nemesis Dreadnoughts back there that are converted from the like old school boxy Dreadnoughts, slammed onto the Nemesis Dreadnought model with a bunch of flags. Like, they look really cool. I did that pre 3D printer, and now I could just like 3D print the exact pieces that I wanted and like put those into the Nemesis Dreadnought model instead of spending a bunch of money on extra Dreadnought models, cutting them, green stuffing some pieces. Like, it saved me both time and money. It would have saved me both time and money in the long run to be able to do that. And even now, it's like saving me time, especially with the chapter like Deathwatch. Just given the amount of customization possible and the way it lends itself to that level of customization, to just be able to say like, oh, like I want X chapter badges. I'm going to print them out. 2 hours later, they're done. Cured, painted, done.
Yeah.
It's definitely like a nice addition for me so far, but I'm also very purposely not getting too deep into it.
Yeah, exactly. It was nice, like recently when I was doing my World Eaters, and they come with 10 to a box, but they only come with one icon.
Oof. 8 icons.
But I just like went over to Colts 3D, and someone had a just generic CSM type of backpack with a 8-point star and some skulls hanging off it, and I was just like, wham bam, thank you, ma'am. Just download it, turned it 45 degrees, auto support, put 20 on a build plate. 2 hours later, I had 20 of them. Cost me like maybe like $1, not even $1 of resin.
Yeah.
50 cents of resin.
So good.
I also think generally, I think it's upped. I mean, I'm sure on the high end, previous to 3D printers, you would have people who are really talented with 3D sculpting, but that meant that you only saw those really cool conversions from high end people.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think the general bar of the hobby has been raised. You're seeing way more cooler conversions hobby wide, as people are just 3D printing stuff. I think it's also kind of opened up a funny like ship a thesis kind of like philosophical questions, like yeah, the Juggernaut Lord, the Lord Invocatus, that comes with it comes with one Juggernaut mount, and it comes with basically 2 Chaos Lords in it. And so, or the Tyranid Hive Tyrant comes with like 1.5 Hive Tyrants in the kit. And so it almost opens up a little philosophical, like for like those who even care. It's like, well, if you use 3D printing to get 2 models out of the same box, is that second one a GW model, or is it a 3D printed model with GW parts on it? It's a funny like I was telling people, I was like, man, it's kind of like a ship a thesis kind of situation over there. I'm not thinking it's like right or wrong or whatever, just an interesting little philosophical question. But I do think it's been a net positive for the hobby in general.
For sure.
All right, last question from the Discord. When do you two think it's worthwhile to get an army or even models commission painted for you? I want to get Jim Stanley on the show sometime, because he's given us a lot of. He said this is still some of my favorite feedback on the show. I've gotten positive feedback. I've gotten more critical feedback, and like sometimes critical hurts to hear, but it's good to like self-analyze and reflect. But he told us through Anthony that this show really reinvigorated the way he looked at the hobby, and that's really, really cool to hear that someone got into hobby. But we wanted to get him on the show anyhow to talk about that, but to also do like a commission episode about like when it's worth it. It can be expensive, but there's like levels. Like most commissioners will have like levels of how much you want to do. A commission isn't always like someone just doing like 5 colors, parade ready, custom whatever army that's going to cost like 2 times what you paid to army to begin with. Sometimes it can just be like, well, while I'm painting the models that are fun to paint, I also need to get like 7 units of troops, just 3 colors of base, and I just need a second set of hands so I don't gouge my eyes out trying to like do this. And that can be something as simple as throwing, $100, $200 like to a buddy. You'd be surprised if the bar you're looking for is pretty low. You don't have to go to like an artist. You can just go. You can literally you can get a buddy who's never done a commission before, but you like oh, he knows what he's doing with the paintbrush. He knows how to thin his paints. You can toss them like $100 or $200, something like that, or a coaching game, or like some beers, like buying a case of beer, or whatever, and then they can do that for you. So if like that's what you're trying to look for, just like like a many hands make light work situation, like you can do that. Or if you love hobbying or whatever, or you don't love hobbying, but you have this model that you really love, and you just feel for whatever reason that you are not going to be able to do it justice, or whatever. The Triumph of St. Catherine, Gilliman, Angron, the Lion, centerpiece models, and you want to like kind of treat yourself a little bit, then that would be like the opposite end of the spectrum. It's a little bit of a splurge, but because you're doing it in such a low volume, it's not going to be like a bank buster. So those would be like the 2 scenarios where I think I personally would try to maybe do it.
I'm like the act of hobbying, the full like unclip them, clean them, glue them, or like all of that stuff brings me deep joy, even when it's really tedious. So it's like, there are definitely times I'm like, I don't have enough time to do all these things. And also like, I know that by commissioning, I will then not have the opportunity to paint those models myself, which is something that I really want to do. All I'd say is that like, I think commissioning is awesome, and it lets people that are artistically talented or just like straight up efficient gain additional income, and it lets people that want to put models on the table that look good do so really quickly. So I think it's awesome. And I also think personally, there's my own particular like obsession with the artsy side of the hobby. I think keeps me from doing it in a way that isn't probably as productive as it could be. But that's okay.
Cool. Let's see. I think that's everything for the question locker. Let me just go to the comments real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I missed anything. Just a whole lot of shit talking when we went 25 minutes without going live.
So good.
We are so good at this. I'm so glad we're not the main show. Cool. That is it, man. Cliff, glad we're finally able to touch base again. Glad we're finally able to get this up and running again.
So good.
Keep the momentum going, brother. It's always good to talk to you. Always fun to do a show with you. All our viewers and everything, love you guys, and we'll see you on the Discord. If you have anything else,
check us out. Check out Stat Check Tuesdays, 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. Eastern, sometime GMT. Check out Enter the Matrix, hosted by Typhus. Comes out intermittently, but when it's out, you should check it out. Best team content available.
Best content available, in my opinion.
Honestly, yeah. The low-key secret, guys, is that Team 40K drives the singles game, right? Like, that's where all the cool, innovative, really interesting stuff pops up, usually for the first time. It makes its way down to the all the individual stuff. Hit up our website, hit up the dashboard, hit up our buddies over at Goonhammer. Check out Art of War Down Under. Those are all the things. See you guys later. Thanks for hanging in there.